I always believed loyalty would be. Enough 10 years, 80, our work week skipped. Vacations too ruin relationships all. In the name of building Carter builders. Into the empire my father always dreamed. Of I was the first one and the last one. Out the one who knew every client's birthday, every suppler's weak point. Every financial shortcut that kept us ahead. And then on a rainy Friday afternoon, I found a folder I wasn't even looking for it, just searching for a misplaced contract, but there was the signed agreement that handed 80% of the company to my brother Michael, the brother who'd spent his 20s backpacking through Europe, who once laughed when I explained quarterly projections, who'd only come home last month because Dad needed held my hands, shook my chest. Tightened, I wasn't just angry, I was done. Let them try running it without me. Growing up, the company wasn't just where we worked, it was where we lived. I remember being 6 years old, sitting under my dad's oak desk while he held court with clients, coloring on the backs of old blueprints. I thought the Carter builder's office smelled like home. Sawdust, printer paper, and the faint sharpness of coffee. By 12 I was answering the phones after school, learning how to talk like an adult. By 16, I was shadowing site managers, watching how deals got closed, how materials got sourced, how deadlines got crushed. Dad always told me, Jess, you're the future of this company. And I believed him. Every single word. Michael was different. 2 years younger, charming, athletic, always smiling, but never around. He breezed through high school, skated through a communications degree, and then left for Europe to find himself. We'd get postcards, Florence, Berlin, Madrid, each with some breezy note like, hope you're not working too hard, Jess. Meanwhile, I was burning through my 20s inside that office. I turned down job offer, skipped girls' trips, canceled dates, all because the company needed me, and I was proud of that. I didn't want to be anywhere else. I wanted to prove myself, to earn the future my father promised. When Michael came back last month, it was sudden, no warning, no explanation. One day I was working late, finalizing the hallway contract. The next, he was walking through the front door like he owned the place, laughing and hugging everyone like a golden retriever on 2 legs. I didn't ask questions. Why stir up trouble? Dad said Michael was just here to learn the ropes, maybe help with marketing. Fine. I kept my head down and kept the company moving until Friday. I stayed late as usual, trying to sort out a contract discrepancy on the hallway deal. Our filing system had been a mess since Michael arrived. Fresh ideas, Dad called it, but it mostly felt like chaos. I dug through the cabinets, cursing under my breath, and that's when I saw the plain manila folder labeled Carter Builder ownership transfer. I should have walked away, should have pretended I never saw it, but of course I opened it page after page, signed and sealed 6 months ago, transferring 80% ownership to Michael Carter. I stared at the paper until the words blur. My name wasn't on a single line. I sat back, heart pounding, and realized this company was never meant to be mine. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, it was always going to Michael. I had spent a decade building someone else's future, and in that moment, something inside me broke. I drove home, and a day says that night my fingers clenched so tightly around the steering wheel they went numb. I barely remember the traffic lights or the streets, just the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears over and over again. Why? When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even turn off the engine. I just sat there staring through the windshield at nothing. The folder still on the passenger seat like a bomb. I couldn't disarm my stomach. Twisted my throat, burned. I fumbled for my phone and called Sophie. She picked up on the second ring. Jess, are you okay? You never call this late. I found something. I whisper, my voice shaking. Sophie, they gave the company to Michael. They gave him everything. There was a pause, then. What are you talking about? I told her everything, my words tumbling over each other. The ownership transfer, the months of lies away everyone must have known except me. Sophie listened without interrupting like she always did. When I finally ran out of breath, she exhaled hard. Jess, she said carefully. You need to calm down before you do anything crazy. I let out a bitter laugh. I'm done being calm, soft they used. Me for 10 years I ran that company. I sacrificed everything, and they were just waiting for Michael to come home. And come over, she urged softly. Don't sit alone with this. Well, figured out, but I couldn't not yet. I needed to face them the next night. Sunday was family dinner, the weekly ritual my mother insisted on even when no one had the time or the patience. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, polite conversation, fake smiles over wine glasses. I walked into the house at 6 sharp. My parents were in the kitchen, laughing over something on the stove. Michael lounged on the couch, feet up, scrolled at his phone. Hey, Jess, he called casually. Want a beer? My hands tightened into fists. I forced a smile. Maybe later. Dinner started as usual. My mom fussing over the food, my dad talking shop, Michael throwing in the occasional half-thought about rebranding or modern appeal. I barely touched my plate. My pulse thudded in my ears. Halfway through dessert, I set down my fork. We need to talk, I said quietly. 3 heads turned toward me. My mother's brow furrowed. My father stiffened. Michael just looked confused. I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on the table. The room fell dead silent. Where did you find that? My father asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Does it matter? I shot back. When were you planning to tell me, or was I supposed to keep working 80-hour weeks while Michael takes the company I built? My mother reached out, her eyes wide. Sweetheart, no. I cut her off. I deserve the truth right here, right now. Michael opened his mouth, but for once he had no words. My father let out a heavy sigh, the kind that usually meant, I'm about to give you a lecture you won't like. He folded his hands on the table, staring at me with the same sharp eyes that once terrified contractors and bank managers. Jessica, he began, this was a strategic decision. I almost laughed. Strategic to cut out the one person holding the company together. Michael shifted uncomfortably beside him, running a hand through his dark hair. Jess, it's not what you think. Then what is it, Mike? I snapped. Because from where I'm sitting, you swooped back into town, and suddenly you own everything I worked for. I didn't ask for that. He burst out, his voice cracking. That stopped me cold. What? I said, frowning. He shoved back his chair, standing abruptly. I didn't want the company, Jess. I never wanted it. Dad told me I had to come back, that the business needed a man at the top, that you were better off handling operations. He shoved the papers in front of me and told me to sign. I stared at him, stunned. I'm an artist, Jess. Michael said, his voice softening. You know that I wanted to stay in Europe, keep painting, but Dad said I owed it to the family, that it was my responsibility as the son. I turned to my father slowly. Is that true? His jaw tightened. You're brilliant at what you do, Jessica, but you're not a man. I cut in, my voice icy. He flinched but didn't deny it. A bitter laugh slipped from my throat. All these years you praised me, called me the future, let me sacrifice everything, but the plan was always to give it to Michael. Jess, Michael said quietly, I didn't know you didn't know. I thought you were okay with it. I let out a shaky breath. Why would I be okay? He gave a helpless shrug. Because you're you, the perfect daughter, the one who always fixes everything. That landed like a slap. For a moment, no one spoke. My mother sat, frozen, her hand halfway to her wine glass. My father looked anywhere but at me. Finally, I pushed back from the table. I can't do this, I whispered. Not tonight. Jess, Michael called after me, but I was already halfway out the door. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I wanted to breathe. I wanted to think. I wanted to figure out who I was outside of Carter Builders, and outside of the role everyone had shoved me into for the first time in a decade. I wondered, what if I just walked away? The next morning, I woke up early out of habit more than need and stared at the ceiling for a long time. No emails, no deadlines, no calls. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have anywhere to be. I made coffee, but it sat untouched on the Counter I walked past my neatly pressed suits, my color-coded folders a stack of project notes on my desk, and I felt hollow. Who was I if I wasn't the woman running Carter Builders? Sophie showed up. By noon, armed with takeout and that determined best friend face she always wore when she thought I was about to implode. Okay, she said, plopping onto my couch. You've got two choices, fall apart or figure out your next move. Which one are we doing today? I gave her a weak smile. Maybe both. We ate in silence for a while before she nudged me. Jess, you don't have to stay there, you know. I shook my head. It's not that simple. It's my family's company, my life's work. But is it really yours? She asked gently. Because from where I'm sitting, they never planned on giving you a seat at the table. Her words hit hard. I spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone with old contacts, people I hadn't called in years because I was always too busy. One of them, Mark Hastings from Jackson Corp, had been trying to poach me for ages. Jessica Carter, he said, laughing. When I called, I knew they'd push you too far someday. I found myself smiling. Just a little. You're not even going to pretend to be surprised. Not even slightly, he said. You're one of the sharpest operators in the business, Jess. Let me know when you're ready to jump ship. I've got a spot waiting for you. I hung up and sat back feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Power, not the kind that comes from a title or a nameplate, but the kind that comes from knowing your own worth. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, I sat on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, and let the quiet settle around me. My phone buzz on the table beside me. Messages from Michael, from my mom, even one call me from my dad. I let them sit for the first time in a decade. They could wait. Tomorrow I decide what I wanted. Tonight I was just going to breathe. By day 3, the first cracks began to show. I woke up to a string of missed calls. Michael, mom, dad, all within the same hour. Ignored. At noon, I got an email from Eleanor, the office manager's subject line: Urgent Anderson project. I almost deleted it, but something in me clicked. I opened it. Jessica Anderson Construction is threatening to pull their $10 million contract. They specifically asked for you on the last call. Please advise. I leaned back, heart racing. Anderson Construction was one of our biggest clients. I had personally managed their account for 5 years. I closed the email without replying. That evening, Sophie dropped by again, eyebrows raised as she waved a bottle of wine. You're holding out longer than I thought. I smirked. It's not me falling apart this time. So we laughed. But inside, I felt the pressure building. I knew how fragile the business was. Without me, Dad liked to act like he was still the mastermind, but in truth, I'd been the one holding the operational threads together for years. By day 5, Michael showed up at my apartment. I didn't answer the door. I watched from the peephole as he stood there, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot, running a hand through his hair like he always did when he was nervous. Finally, he left, sliding a note under the door. Jess, I'm sorry I can't handle this without you. Please call me. I sank to the floor, back against the door, staring at the note. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Another part wanted to run after him and fix everything like I always did. But a sharper, newer voice inside whispered, not yet. Day 6, the real storm hit. My father called me himself, Jessica. He barked as soon as I answered. What the hell are you doing? Good to hear from you too, Dad, I said coolly. Anderson's walking. Westridge is asking for status updates. We can't provide. Michael isn't over his head. You need to come back and fix this. I smiled slightly. Let Michael handle it. Dad, he's the owner. Now remember, there was a long pause on the line. This isn't funny, Jessica, he said, his voice tight. This is your family's legacy. No, Dad, I said softly. It's your legacy. I already gave everything I had. You made your choice when you signed those papers. I hung up before he could answer that. Night. Michael came back this time. I opened the door. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. No trace of his usual confident grin. Jess, he said quietly, I need you. I Cross my arms. Why should I help? His shoulders sag because you're the only one who ever knew how to run this place, because I'm drowning, and because I'm sorry I should never have agreed to any of this. For a moment we stood in heavy silence. Finally I let out a long sigh. I'll help, I said, voice firm but not for free, not as the assistant, not as the fixer, not as the workhorse. Michael's eyes lifted, cautious, hopeful. Then what? He asked softly. I met his gaze. I want 40% ownership, board seat full, operational control. And you, I added, stepping closer, you step back into the role you actually want, not the one Dad forced on you. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I never wanted to be the boss, he whispered. I just wanted to paint. A small, sad smile tugged at my lips. Then, let's fix this together. The next morning, I walked into the Carter Builders office for the first time in over a week. Heads turned, conversations halted. Eleanor practically dropped her coffee mug when she saw me. Jessica, she gasped. I didn't know you were. I gave her a small smile. I'm here for a meeting in the conference room. Michael was already waiting, nervously tapping his fingers on the table. My parents sat at the far end, Dad with his arms crossed, jaw tight, Mom looking between us with pleading eyes, as if sheer maternal hope could glue the family back together. I closed the door carefully and took my seat, setting a folder in front of me. Before we start, I said evenly, I need to be clear. I'm not here as your daughter or little sister. I'm here as the person you need to save this company, and I'm setting the terms. Dad's face reened immediately. You're being ridiculous, Jessica. I raise a hand, cutting him off. No, for 10 years I bent over backward for this family. I worked 80-hour weeks. I saved deal after deal, and you handed everything to Michael without a word to me. Dad slammed his fist on the table. I'm still your father, and this is still a business. I shot back, my voice shaking now, and you're watching it fall apart because of your pride. The room fell into a heavy silence. Michael cleared his throat. She's right, Dad. My father turned sharply to him. Don't start. No, Michael said, his voice surprisingly firm. I never wanted this. I told you that from the beginning. You pushed me back here, signed papers I didn't understand, forced me into a role I was never meant to fill. He looked at me, eyes raw. Just, I'm sorry, I should have stood up for you sooner. For a long second I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. Then softly I said, we can fix this. I opened my folder, sliding the proposal across the table. Here's what I want: 40% ownership taken from Michael's share. I become Chief Operations Officer with final say on all projects and budgets. Michael keeps his remaining 40%, but focuses on creative direction and marketing, where his real talents are. Mom and Dad retain 20% and move into advisory roles, only, no interference. Dad's face twisted. You can't dictate terms to us. Yes, she can. Michael interrupted, because we need her. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it again, grinding his teeth. Mom reached over, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Thomas, she said softly, she's not wrong. For the first time I saw something shift in my father's expression, not defeat, but something close to weary acceptance. He sat back, exhaling heavily. Fine. My heart pounded. We went over details for the next 2 hours. Restructuring plans, immediate client outreach, leadership responsibilities. For once Michael listened intently, taking notes, nodding along. When the meeting ended, I stood, gathering my things. Dad rose to Jessica. He said quietly, you know I've always been proud of you. I paused and turned. I know you've needed me, I corrected gently. But proud, I'm not sure you've ever really seen me until now. His face softened, and for a flicker of a second I saw something vulnerable in his eyes. But I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out, my shoulders squared, heart pounding. This wasn't just about saving the company. This was about saving myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't working for a promise or a dream someone else dangled in front of me. I was working for me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I walked back into Carter Builders not as the exhausted daughter desperate for approval, but as the chief operations officer, a partner, decision maker, someone who set the rules, clients. Notice Maxwell Anderson, who'd been ready to walk, sat down with me. Personally, I laid out our new structure, reassured him of our timeline, and promised results. He smiled for first time in weeks. You're the one who should have been running this all along. Jessica, he said, shaking my hand firmly. Michael surprised me too. He'd always been the free spirit, the artist, the charming wild card I couldn't rely on. But once we carved out his proper role, marketing, branding, creative, he lit up. He pitched a fresh ad campaign that wowed the team. He revived client outreach with his natural charisma. For the first time, I saw him not as a flaky little brother I had to cover for, but as a real partner. We still clashed. Sometimes I was meticulous, measured, focused on numbers. He was spontaneous, energetic, sometimes chaotic, but instead of fighting, we found balance. I'd rein him in when needed. He'd pull me out of my tunnel vision when I got too locked in. At home, things were more complicated. My dad kept his distance, hovering at the edge of meetings, offering the occasional comment, but mostly staying out of my way. My mom fussed over us constantly, trying to smooth things over, but even she seemed to sense the new dynamic. We weren't the same family we'd been a month ago, and maybe that was a good thing. One evening, after a long day, closing the hallway deal, Michael and I sat side by side in the office, sharing leftover takeout and half laughing over old memories. I never wanted to steal this from you, Jess, he said quietly, staring into his cup. I didn't know how to tell Dad no. I smiled faintly. I didn't know how to tell him no either, not until now. He looked up a little stunned and grinned. Guess we're both learning. Huh, yeah, I said softly. We are. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying everything alone. For the first time, we were building something together. A month later, I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the dress I hadn't worn in years, a soft blue, not one of my usual black work blazers. Tonight wasn't about business. Tonight, it was about me. Nathan, an engineer from Anderson Construction I'd worked with for years, had asked me out after meeting last week. Before I would have brushed it off with a polite excuse, too busy, too many deadlines, too much on my plate. But this time I'd said yes. I caught my reflection smiling back at me. I barely recognized her at work. The company was thriving. Michael had pulled in 2 new client accounts with his fresh marketing approach. Our project timelines were tighter than ever thanks to the new systems I'd put in place. Even Dad had started to relax, showing up just once a week in his new advisory role, occasionally offering a word of praise instead of criticism. The office felt lighter. I felt lighter that Sunday. We gathered for family dinner, not the stiff, formal gatherings of the past, but something new. Michael teased me about my date. Mom fussed over the food, but stopped herself from steering every conversation. Dad even cracked a joke, shaking his head fondly as he watched us banter. There were still scars. We were still learning, but the air no longer hummed with unspoken tension. As we cleared the dishes, Michael leaned over and murmured, "Did you ever think we'd get here?" I smiled. "Not in a million years." He laughed softly. "Me neither." I stepped outside after dinner, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. For so long I'd lived for the next deadline, the next project, the next approval. I'd define myself by how hard I worked, how much I gave, how much I endured. Now, for the first time, I was defining myself by something else. My choices, my balance, my worth. I pulled out my phone, glancing at a message from Nathan. Looking forward to tonight, I smiled, pocketing the phone for the first time in a decade. The future stretched out before me, not as a burden, but as a promise, and I was ready to claim